Okay, so this is probably by far my best Power App tips and tricks with a multi-step form. This is needed for those very long forms, breaking them up to multiple steps, including validation on each step, and we're going to take a look at the component feature that make things easier. Okay, so here on the screen we have just a quick recap, a single form with multiple sections, and what we want to do is break this up to multiple forms. So let's go ahead and launch PowerApps Studio so that way we can go ahead and get started. And I think this multiple form technique is really key, and as I mentioned before, I tried this many times before. Some worked well, some became very tedious in the maintenance cycle. All three techniques, even the third one that I'm going to show you today, all three techniques will work. I think this is by far the third one that I've seen that was much easier to maintain. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So what we want to do, we want to go ahead and break these screens up. So here we're just going to replicate the screen. So we just do a duplicate screen, and let's just do it a third time. And we're going to have one for the parking spot details and then one for the car details. So here, the second one, let's just rename this to screen parking spot. It's really parking spot. And then this one could be car. So screen car, screen parking spot. And then on the parking spot, let's just go ahead and rename this form also to parking spot, similar name to the screen. And then for this form, just do car, form car. Simple enough. All we did was just rename things. Now what we want to do is take advantage of our component, because with the new component feature within PowerApps, we can now centralize this header, because that's the problem that we have with screens, and that's why I try to minimize my screen usage, because I start to having different copies of these, and every time I make a change I have to triplicate it in this scenario. So with components we can centralize this. So let me copy this, and I'm just copying the label. No, I copied the rectangle. Let me copy the label. Switch over here to components. Now you may not see components. Understand that components, I want to say it went GA probably 2 weeks ago, so probably like the second week in April. But they say that you only will see this feature if you're creating a net new Power App form. So, I got too many here, so let me delete this one. So if this is not a brand new Power App form, or it hasn't been created after a certain date, I don't know exactly when that date is, you may not see that feature. So try your brand new Power App form and see if it kicks in at that point. All right, so here we just want to call this comp header, right? And what I'm going to do, let me go back to the screen and get these dimensions on the header. So the header in this case is 444 by 40, and that's what I want my component canvas size to be. So 444 40. And then I'm going to go ahead and drop in my Tesla red, and then right click and hit paste, and that's going to bring in my label. Okay, so now I just butt that over to the right, and what I'm doing, I'm copying these components because that's going to save me a few keystrokes with trying to get the dimensions and the size and all that stuff right. So here, if I can just grab what already exists and then pop it up. Where did I have this logo? Did I have this far to the right? I had a little space there, but let me show you the power components. So for right now, I'm going to push this all the way to the right, and everything else is fine, and that's my name comp header. So now what I can do on this screen and all my other three screens is just come in here, select these guys, and hit delete. So I'm just selecting and hitting delete on the keyboard. And now I go to insert, go to this custom section here in my toolbar, and hit the comp component, and that's going to bring it in. And because it drops everything, all the new controls in at the 0, 0 coordinate, this is actually going to land right exactly where we need it to be. So now let me go to the other screen and do the same thing, delete the manual piece, and then drop in my component. And then go to the third screen, delete all these manual controls, and then drop in my component. So now, as I mentioned before, I need this logo to be a little bit to the left because I need room for that scroll when we're in SharePoint. So now I just go to my component, slide this over to the left a bit, go back to my screens, and now all of my screen headers are up to date. So it's all in sync. So one single component to represent all the other screens. And there's other things you can do with components, and we're going to jump into them as we start to break our headers and all that stuff up. Okay, so back to the top. So now I have my header centralized with a component. Let me go ahead and remove the fields I don't need for the main form. So for the main form, I only want the batch number and start date. So let me delete all of this other items. And all I'm doing is just going through here, selecting the data card and hitting delete. Special, I don't need this one. This is my hidden field behind the scenes, right? And the good news is because I duplicated the screen, all that functionality I have with the drop downs and then the conditional control, all that's going to be embedded in my other screen, so I can use it where I need it and just keep it. So for the other areas I don't need it, I'm deleting them. Now what I'm trying to do is to find this form control. So now because I don't have that many fields, this form control really does not need, it doesn't require that vertical space anymore. Okay, so now let me go to a parking spot, do the same deal here. Just delete the ones I don't need. So again, just select, and that came over fine, I think. So if I hold down Control A, what I'm testing for is the other option. And there it is, and it still comes in required. So all that functionality we built before is now maintained because I duplicated the screen. All right, so now I'm on the last one for where we want the car information. So let me just go ahead and delete everything else I don't need all the way up to the car. And then I'm getting that red squiggly because that's my special other type, which is not needed for this view. So delete that. And now the big one, right? So all that work we put in with cascading drop downs where car makes and models, we still want to make sure this is still working as expected. And so far it is. So we're good. Okay, so now, again, let me just do some more tweaking here with sizing. So let me just shrink this all the way up. And for parking spot, do the exact same. Shrink this down and get rid of all this other white space at the bottom. It's no longer needed. Okay, so now let me just kind of zoom out to kind of see what type of vertical spacing we're working with. Because what we want to do is drop in some buttons that will allow us to navigate between these screens. Now, first glance, you're very tempted to use a component for this. And I think a component in this scenario is probably, on the surface, it seems like a really, really good idea, but I'm having problems with the click event, meaning that when I click this button, I want it to do something. Now, very simple formulas like navigate to another screen is going to be fine. But as we kind of build this out, you will see that we're going to need a little bit more than that, in components as of to date do not support the additional functionality that we require. And we'll talk through that, as we kind of get to it. So with this button, all I want to do is just style it real quick. So going here with my Tesla red, I want the text for this to be next, right? And then, is that a good size? Yep. And then from here, I want, I'm trying to get all my options, all my different changes that are required in here now, because what I'm going to do is style this all the way up and then copy this button, which is the old school way of doing it before components, right? Again, this would have been a really good, let's just leave that color for now. I'll leave the blue for now. Yeah, that's weird. Let's do it like a charcoal. But on the surface, it would have been really good for a component, but as you will see when we start to validate our form, it kind of falls apart. Okay, so this is good. So let me copy this and then go to my other screens and then just paste it in. Oh, I do need the coordinates. So what's the coordinate? My y coordinate is 304. That's important. So let me go here, paste this in, drop it to 304. Oh, that's not going to be long enough. We're going to need, what's my new one? Let's do 425. You'll notice that I'm copying this Y component, this Y coordinate, because I want my buttons to be at the same level every time I navigate in and out. It's just a much better experience. So let me just copy this one again, bring this guy down. And this is going to go back. So this one you want a non-primary color, so maybe like a gray. And we want this to go previous or back, whichever name that you want. And then now that I have this down, let me just go ahead and copy these guys. Where's my Y? My Y is 425. Go to my last screen, paste these in, drop them down to 425. And then screw them over. And I'm using my arrow key so that way my Y coordinate remains the same and I'm only navigating over, pushing them over to the left. And on the last screen, we actually want this to do save. And I'll show you how to wire up a save button as well. Okay, so previous, we want this to navigate to screen parking spot, which is the previous screen, right? And this is why, as you see me type in this formula, this is why the prefix is everything. Because now I know I want to navigate to a screen, and that sometimes I don't remember the names that I've given it. So having those prefixes are really good, and they work very well with IntelliSense. So once I have that down, let me save that, navigate to, so now I'm on my parking lot screen. I use Alt and click to get back to execute that button. And this one's going to be my screen main, right? And fade event. So I hit on the Alt key and I go there. I need to drop this down to 425. Set my Y coordinate, right? Okay. And then this one you want to, on select, send this one to parking spot. And this is just, just navigating these over, right? So there's nothing really earth-shattering with this concept. And then with this one, we're going to send this one to car. Screen, car. And then this is the last screen. And then the save event, we're going to wait on that for save. And now I'm navigating through my screens without a problem. Okay. So now I got my navigation going with my buttons. I want to wire these up. I want to wire up my form because I want to wire up the save event, and then we'll come back and do the validation. And when I say validation, what we want to do is to, every time you click next, do not allow your user to go to the next screen until everything on this field is populated, right? So now if I, oops, didn't mean to do that. If I click into here, this is a required field, and I click next, it's going to allow me to navigate all the way through. And then when I hit save, it's going to say you have an error, but my error is on step 1. So now it just becomes a little bit confusing to the end user. So it's best to kind of navigate the form or navigate the step as you kind of push through. All right, so let's do this. Let's wire up our forms to where we can actually save them. And there's many different tricks to do that, but this is the technique that I really enjoy and I really kind of gravitate towards. So the first thing I need to do, I need to know which mode the form is in, because that's going to dictate how I wire up the item. So the first thing I need to do is go to the SharePoint integration and start to put in flags for each one of these modes, the new mode, edit mode, and view mode. All right. So what I'm going to do is just come up here, create me a variable, and just call it form mode. And this is going to, there's actually a built-in, they call them enums, or enumeration, to where you have predefined values based on a certain type. So I have these enums here, and I'm going to use the form mode new, which is a valid enum. Okay. So I'm going to set that one to new. Let's copy that. And then go to my edit, put a semicolon between these different methods, and then put this as edit, and then do the same for view, and put this in view. So now when I come to my different formulas, and this is really good to have, because there may be different scenarios as you would see, and I'm not going to do the whole spoiler alert right here, but it's really good to understand which mode your form is in or which mode your screen is in, so that way you can apply different formulas or different techniques to different controls and buttons and all this other good stuff, right? So for a form, when you have multiple, here's the biggest issue that we have with forms. Forms are, and let me just highlight this. Let's go back to the SharePoint list, because I think if you can kind of see this in action, it starts to sink in on why we need to jump through these several hoops to make this work. A form, so what we did, we took this one item, right? So look at that selected item, and we have multiple form controls that represents different columns for the selected row, right? So when we're dealing with our form, we're only dealing with this one item. And when it comes to saving, you have to be very careful. There's a save form method that's out of the box, and you don't have to do any tricks. And I could wire this up and say form 1 save, form 2 save, form 3 save. But the problem with that save form is that when you save it for form 1, whatever value's in there and whatever value's not there is going to apply. So it seems like they have like this race condition. So I tried that, but I couldn't get all three forms to save all the information for the columns that form instance represent. So what I found out was that in the form control, because a lot of this stuff is done for us, we don't really dig in deep and understand what's really going on under the cover. But in the form control, there are three main components that you have to keep an eye out on when dealing with multiple instances of a form that represent a single item. One of it is the data source. So this form is going to be saved to the same data source. And all these are going to be set exactly the same because I copied this form instance. But I'm just going through it because in your scenario, you may have a different scenario, or you may be partially wired and you want to hook it up to represent this new method or this new strategy I'm going to show you. So the data source is, the data source that this item or the row is within. All your forms should point to the same data source. The item, this is the number one item, or the number one piece. The item has to represent the same item. And so right now, by default, let me just go through what they're doing by default. By default, they're saying if the selected item is blank or empty or has an error, then just grab the first item. They just use this as a placeholder. Grab the first item in the list and allow the form to start editing or modifying that piece, or else get the selected item. So what does that mean? What they're saying is that as you select these items, that selected item is what kicked in for the SharePoint integration. So as I go through here and double click, that's the selected item. So that's the selected item. So that's selected item for view. And then if I go edit, this is the selected item for edit mode. And if I go new, if I uncheck this, this is going to be the selected item. In this case, there's no selected item, right? Because we're going new, so all of these should be blank. And what it does is it goes and grabs the first one, does a reset, empty all the fields out, and then allows you to create a new item by that formula. It's kind of weird. Like, I don't understand this first. There's actually a default method, and I'm going to show you that now. So now that we understand what they're doing, all we need to do is that if the var form mode is new, that's one of the conditions we need to check against. So if my var form mode is equal to form mode, I have to test it against the enum, new, meaning that I'm in new mode, meaning that they click the new button to create a new item, then I want to defaults parking parking request 2. Is that it? Yeah, parking request 2. I want to get the default value for parking request 2 data source, which is going to give me an empty item. Else, I want to use the ShareGate integration, the one that the user selected on the list, right? Because they're only selecting items when they're viewing or editing them. When they're creating a new item, I need to get the default item for that. So this is the magic formula. So you want to copy this to each and every form for the item property, right? So get rid of all the default stuff that they have and paste this in for each item, right? Okay. So unfortunately, we have to duplicate or triplicate that formula, but it's going to work like gangbusters. And there's different arguments to say, okay, you can do this once and save it into a variable. I tried that and got some really weird, interesting behavior when viewing between list items. And I'll talk through that in a bit. But I'm doing this out of the gate because I want to show you the right way to do this and not necessarily string you along through all the issues that we kind of run into. So this is the recommended approach. I would not, the recommendation is not to do all of this and save the item in a global variable and then set that global variable to each one of these. That was my gut reaction because I hate duplicating anything, right? It's dry, do not repeat yourself, the dry concept. So, but this works like gangbusters, and other scenarios where dynamic drop downs and stuff like that, this always works. So I highly, highly recommend, though it seems like you're repeating yourself, to put this explicit formula for the item property and not try to use a global variable for that. All right, so that's that. And then the third one I told you was 3. There's the data source, there's the item, and then there's the default mode. Now the default mode is what sets the form up. When you're looking at the form, you see how you get these bounding boxes because we're ready to create something. So this is in new mode. And then if I select one of these and hit edit, this is the form in edit mode. And if I select one of these and just view it, this is the form in view mode. And you see how the controls and all that stuff kind of respond accordingly based on the mode that you're in. So those modes are set through this SharePoint integration. And you see how it says set the view mode for form main, set the new form mode for form main, but it's doing everything to form main. So what about my other forms, right? So, and I got one or two options. I can replicate that formula for the SharePoint integration for each one of the form instances I have, or I can come up here and say, you know what, for the default mode, instead of hard coding this to edit, just copy or replicate whatever form main is doing, right? And the syntax for that is form main mode, right? So I'm gonna do that for parking spot, and then I'm gonna go do that for form car, and then I'm gonna let form main kind of do what it's doing because integration is taking care of main, and what's in sets for main is just going to propagate down to parking and propagate down to form car. Now, once you have this wired up, right, your second instance of the form, and I probably should have did this first. Like, what if you do, because, this sets you up to set up like wizard-based type forms, right, to where you only show like 5 fields at a time, click next, 5 fields at a time, click next, 3 or 4, 5 fields at a time, or click next. Because, from a user experience guideline, they say try to keep it minimum under 6 controls, unless you're dealing with like a row that to where the fields are related, like city, state, and zip. That can count as 1. But they say, from a usability standpoint, try to break your forms up to where you're displaying right around 6. Of course, it's not hard and fast, but right around 6 controls at a time. So you can end up with like 7, 8, or 10, or whatever the count may be of screens and form instances. So to keep a lot of this plumbing down to a minimum, the recommendation is to wire up one. Once you get this to where you need it to be, then copy this and paste it out, because then all your forms should be wired, and the only thing that you're changing is like the form name and the fields that it display. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Again, I'm just trying to throw out tips and tricks that I can think of that would kind of save you some time on handling this. All right, so now that our forms are wired up, we got the magic formula for item. Again, keep that real time. Try not to shortcut that one. We have our default mode looking at, this is form main. We have our default mode for our second instance and beyond, looking at the form main. And all of our data sources are pointing to the same data source. So these forms are wired up to handle multiple form instances for the same item, and will not have a saving conflict. All right, well, it will have a saving conflict until you do this next step. So on this item here, on your save button, what you want to do is say, when you click on select for save, I want to, I want to go and copy this. Let me go copy this item formula. You actually need this. I need this conditional item here. So when I go to save, right, on select for the save button, if I paste this in, okay, so if the form mode is new, I want the item to be defaults or else do the selected item. I want to save that into a variable. Again, this is what I really want to do out the gate, but it just doesn't work like gangbusters as you expect it to be. Okay, so I want to save that to a local variable, and this is how you save these forms. You do not do save form 1, form 2, form 3. You do not do that. You do a patch, right? And then you do and look at the IntelliSense or the helper text here. So the patch says which data source you want to save this to. That's going to be parking request. Then it's going to ask what is the record, and the item is the record in this case. And then it's asking what are the updates that you want, and then it has this ... So you can do as many updates as necessary, meaning that for all my form instances or for all my form controls pointing to this single item, I need to string them along here, right? So let's show, and you can do them in any order. It really doesn't matter, because what the form instance is going to do is only going to save these updates. It's only going to save the changes for the controls or for the columns that are associated to that form instance, right? So here I'm going to do form, I did form main, so let me do form parking spot dot updates, and then let me do form car dot updates, and I'm set. I'm all set. All right, we made a bunch of changes. Let's save this and push it up and see exactly what we're working with. So now we should have a nice form broken down to bite-sized chunks. And again, I mean, to be honest with you, this form that I'm showing you is not that long at all. It probably doesn't warrant this extra ceremony to break these up. But there's going to be many instances where you're going to be dealing with large forms, and you're going to have to chunk them out. And now you have a pattern to do that. All right, so let's go into edit mode, click next. Here's parking spot, click next again. There's car details, click save. And I just assume it's saved, right? And we can, but the main thing is I'm scrolling through these, right? And it's doing what it's expected. Now, watch this. Now, if I close this out and hit refresh, you saw me hit save like 12 or 13 times, right? So, it didn't do that. So let me do a new item. So, okay, so new item. I want to show you something cool, but it didn't work because I was doing the edit item versus new. All right, so new item, select my parking lot, and then you see how I'm able to just like breeze through it. You just get, and then my fields are related to a topic, right? Car details, parking spot details. You know, maybe we should have requester information or something like that. We can have it just to be consistent, right? Where you have like this sub header and then the fields. For my first one, I want to be consistent, so maybe we can add something like that in, and then hit save, right? I don't see the item saved here, so let me hit save again. You know how the users do it, right? You just keep save, and then say, okay, it doesn't work. All those saves actually were working. It just didn't show me that it's saved, right? Because I had the field up. Remember, like if I go to this one where we don't have the multi-select set up, as soon as I fill this out and hit save, this dialog goes away. And there's like it doesn't refresh the page, but there's a data refresh. Then that item magically appears. It's actually pretty slick the way they did it, right? So let me kill it. So how do we get our form to do that, right? So when we hit the save event, I can show you actually. So if I go here, put my badge number, go with the default date, select a spot here, select a car, right? Now, okay, let me just do blue. Let me type it out. Someone's complaining that I'm banging on the keyboard. So, okay, so if I hit save here, it's just going to save and not going to refresh and do anything. But if I hit save here, it's going to save and do what it needs to do. But see what happens? See how it didn't save all of the information when I used the default save? I actually did not account for that, which is interesting because I should account for that. because there's two ways that the user can save this form, right? So we have our save button, and then we have the default save. So let's solve both problems. So our custom save should close the dialog and show us the information right away, right? Versus stand on the screen and it seem like nothing's happening. So what needs to happen is that we need to patch this, and then we need to do a request hide. And that's going to do several things. First thing it's going to do is close our browser, right? The dialog box. Then it's going to refresh the data and show us this information. The next thing we need to do is to make sure that there are special formula or secret. You're going to search on this, and until I create the blog post or someone watching this creates the blog post, you're not going to find this scenario with patch, right? I looked high and low, and I didn't find anyone that said, I didn't know that this existed until I stumbled across something else. Like someone was doing this for, I think, a different data source. And it's like, oh, you can use the form updates to do that versus, because you see some of the, when you Google patch for PowerApps, you're going to see the nasty, here's your item, and then here's each column. And they have to do JSON format, saving each column and its value and stringing that all together. It's a mess. It's a hot mess. So let's do this. Let's save our unsave event. So instead of submit form, which we don't want, we want to do this patch, right? And I really wish there was a way that I can duplicate, and that's what's missing, right? So we have components to centralize the component in the UI. But we need PowerApps team. We need a way to centralize functions or formulas and write that formula once and just call it in multiple spots. That's what's needed. If you can do that, we're off to the races. All right, so now we wired up the default save. This unsave is a default save button. We wired up our custom save button, and this should work as expected. All right, so let's go through here and push these changes up, and Control F5. Let's see how many Control F5s it's going to take. Let's get rid of some of these. Actually, we can get rid of all of these, right? Let's just start from scratch. All right, Control F5. Let's go to a new. Put in my badge number. Hit next. Select my parking lot. Hit next, and put in my color, and I'll go with the default value for now and hit save. Right, just like that, just like the out of the box. It saves it immediately. It shows up immediately. We're good to go, and all of my data is saved. Right, data. The ones that are empty are not the ones part of the form, because this is going to be part of my special. We didn't select this, but we need to test that. But this is going to be part of my flow. Right, so once I submit this, it's going to go through approval process, and I'm capturing that information. But that's not something that my end user would do, right? So here, so this can be a pain. So you notice how I finished one, and I was on the end, and I went to new, and I was on the third step. That's weird. The other thing that's weird is when you hit new, you go next. Oh, is this saving data? What in the world? Yeah, you shouldn't be saving data. If I go next, it's allowing me to next and save. It must have threw an error. It's like, and save an empty record, right? So we have 0 validation. So let's put in some validation. So that's the next part. So what we want to do, let's start from the top on our main screen. And when you click next, I don't want you to navigate unless all of the fields are completed for this form, right? For this form instance, not for the entire screen or all my forms, just for the 3 or 4 fields that I'm showing the user. So to do that, you just take your form, your main form, or the form that you're on. There's a valid property, right? And so if that's valid, then navigate. If it's not valid, what if all the required fields are not populated? Now what? You want to submit the form, and this is going to seem way awkward. So submit form. Submit. There we go. You want to submit the form. Now, why would you submit a form if it's not valid? No, and I don't mean to use a special notation. I don't want to confuse things. I want to be consistent here. All right, so submit the form. And the reason why you submit the form, if this is not valid, is so you can show the user what's missing and what's not valid to force them to complete it, right? So if this is valid, yep, go ahead and navigate. If it's not valid, submit the form, which is weird, but it works, to show the validation errors, right? So now if I go in here, this is perfect. I don't have a badge number. The badge number is required. I hold down my Alt key, hit next. It says, hey, put in the badge number. And if I do, because I'm in PowerApps Studio, I got to click in here several times. Okay, come on. All right, so error message goes away, and it allows me to proceed to the next step. And I need to wire this up the same way, right? So can I save some clicks here? Let's see. If I go, let me go back. Can I copy this? Let me copy this. There's one thing that's not going to be the same. Let me just put this on a new line. All right, so, so my form name is wrong. So, okay, so for this one, this is parking spot, right? So form parking spot. Just copy this. I'm just trying to save some keystrokes here. Go to screen. Oh, okay, maybe this wasn't worth copying. Go to screen car. All right, let me put this semicolon there because it's screwing up my IntelliSense. Go to screen car, fade, submit, form, parking spot. So I have my placeholders here, so I'm just going through and updating everything that's relevant for this page here. And then go ahead and remove this. Now, I'm not going to put this validation check on the previous screen, right, because they would just want to go back, so I'm not going to force them to fill it out, just in case they want to just kind of look ahead and see what was missing. Right, so I'm not going to put it there. And now in here, I want to put it before I save it, right? So here I'm going to go ahead and do my trick to find the right item. And then I'm going to do my if form car is valid, then go ahead and save the form, and then do my request. Else submit the form, meaning show the form errors. And again, I don't mean to use this special internal reference syntax. That's it just keeps popping up from my IntelliSense, right? So I mean that's it. So it's not formatted. I mean it's not laid out in a way that's readable. But this is exactly what's going on. It's the same logic as before. You test and see if the form is valid. If it is, allow them to do the happy path. If not, then you do this awkward thing of submitting the form, which means show validation errors, right? I have a formula error, which is what? I need to close my if statement. There we go. All right, so I think that's it for this video. Let's just test and make sure this works. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to show you, and this video is going super long. Try to keep them under 20-25 minutes. Let's do this. Let's do real quick, just make sure this works as expected. Okay, and also I'll talk through some other things, like if you're irritated that once you submit this, let me just make sure I can go. Nope, let me do a Control F5. I was supposed to be testing validation errors. All right, so okay, here we go. So validate looks good. Click next. Validate, great. Let me do my other. Look at that. Validate, great. Next. Save. Nope. Need a color. And it's just going to give me the first vehicle, which is fine. And now save. And that's how you validate through steps. All right, so let me show you some other things that I really wanted to touch on. And let me talk you through this. Okay, so if you're irritated that, okay, every time I click on a new item or view item, I'm at the end of the previous step on a different item. I want this to always start at the beginning. Just do your SharePoint. Let me tell you something about the SharePoint integration. SharePoint integration, when you're dealing with custom forms that live on the SharePoint list, because of all these actions of clicking through and editing and clicking the next one and all that other stuff is so fluid, and there's no page refresh. There's a lot of caching going on. Caching is saving things in memory. So SharePoint integration is probably the only event, and you got so many events, right? You got the app on start event, you got screen on view and on hidden events. SharePoint integration events of on edit, on new, on view are the only ones that fire consistently when you're clicking through that list of items, right? So because of that, I recommend always, if there's anything that you need to do before a form instance loads while you're on the SharePoint list, and again, this is something that's with SharePoint lists and not necessarily or custom Power App forms and not necessarily Canvas forms, is leverage these events because that's going to give you the best real-time instance to keep up with the user as they're clicking through or interacting with these list items on the same list, okay? So here, all I want to do is that when you hit on edit for this, I just want to navigate them to the main screen, right? So if I do screen main, and I'm not going to do a transition, right? I just want it to pop. Oop. Screen transition. Oh, what is the name? Is it transition? Yeah, screen transition, not fade, but none. All right. So that's going to force them to always go to the beginning. So I want that on edit. I want that on view. I want that on new, especially on new. Okay. So that's going to give me where I need to be. The other thing is, let me show you one other thing. Probably one of the key pieces with components that I didn't share is to use some of the component properties. Right. So here's a prime example where I every time I use a header, I have to go in here and specify like the label and the size of the label, and then I use rectangles to kind of get like to fake that horizontal rule or the section break or whatever. I want to make all of this into a component and then just reuse that component and set the title for that instance that I'm using it. Right. So in order to do that, let me just go back to components, hit new. And let's just rename this one too. Let's call it section header, right? To differentiate between regular header. So I do comp section header, and let me just go in here and get some coordinates and some dimensions here. So the size. Actually, let me just copy this. I'm gonna do a Control C. I'm gonna copy that label. And the size on this is going to be 44440, very similar to my other one. So let's hit my canvas size up to 44440, right? And let me just go ahead and paste in that label, and that's going to come in nice and tight the way I need it. And then I want to do a horizontal rule at the bottom, and I have to fake that with these rectangles. So let me just go ahead and grab a rectangle, slide it, tip here, go to width, and then my height. I used to do a 2 pixel height. 1 pixel, it doesn't seem to show up all the time for whatever reason. So 2 pixel height, and then I need to mute the color, right? And you see it's there, it's just at the very bottom, but it's there and it's light. So I want to mute the color. Hold on, let me go back, select this rectangle. And for this color, and this is one of the things that irritates me the most. All these disabled colors and all these other colors, you have to remember to set these to the same color, or else when the user mouses over or hover over a rectangle, it flashes, and it's one of those things that's really, really irritating. All right, so now this is very similar to what we did for comp header. No big change here, no big deal. But the big deal is using these components, because I want to make this dynamic. I can't have it hard coded like I did here. So to make this dynamic, I'm going to use this custom property, and let's just call this header text. And then, so that's my display name. From my name, I'm not using any spaces. So I'm going to butt all that together. And then the description displays the text as the header. Probably very wordy description. All right, and then you have these data types. And again, what you're doing is for your component, like what the out of the box components are doing. Let me just go ahead and create this. You're making these properties available to your user to where they can set it, right? So if I'm on this component here, you see all these properties that you can set that we've been setting. Your components can have those too. So now, which makes them reusable, which is the key. So I have a section that's missing here. So let's go ahead and put a section here. So I'm going to edit. I'm going to put a custom data card. And again, I still want to use my data cards to store these controls because, one, this is the only component that allows me, that has like some sort of grid system to it. So it helps me arrange fields and controls on the screen in a more predictable way and not be spending a lot of time trying to, line up things horizontally and vertically and all this other good stuff. I just use a data card and kind of, it does that for me. And then I can use the column count to change it if I wanted a two column layout, single column layout, 3-column layout, like all that's baked in. It's going to line for me and all this other good stuff. All right, so let me rename this to header. So DC header, right? And then where it says go ahead and add a component or add a control, let me just go here to custom and then drop in my, oops, wrong one. Hit delete. Drop in my section header, right? And then scoop my data card up. Oh yeah, that's the other thing about data cards. They're fluid. So, if, when your validation error and everything kind of kicks in and everything kind of pushes down, everything else just pushes down with it. You don't have to account for weird formulas and X and Y coordinates and stuff like that. Again, they save you a ton of time. All right, so here, what do we want to call this? So this is going to be my header text. Oh, why did that come over lowercase? I thought that was internal only. So this is display. Interesting. All right, so you want to make sure these are consistent. All right, you want to make sure these are consistent. All right, so header text, requester details. So requester details. And then hit spot. All right, so we set that property, but it's not going to do anything because we didn't wire it up. So now we have to go into our section header, go into our label that we dropped in. It's hard coded to that. We say, actually, I want you to use whatever the user provides in that property, header text. I want you to display that, and that's what it's going to do. So in order to get to these properties that live here, and you can create as many as you need, and use them on your controls within your component, you reference the component name dot, and then all those properties will pop up, and IntelliSense will help you. All right. So now if I go back here, requester details, if I want to change it, detailing details or whatever, it works like any other component. It's custom. You centralize a lot of your settings and maybe formulas in certain cases. Use them as black boxes or things that are encapsulate a lot of business logic. There's a lot of things that you can do with components and make this thing really, really sweet. Okay. All right. So let me save this all. In the next video, what we want to do, we want to cover how do we take a blah looking form and kind of make it a bling looking form, meaning that you kind of modernize them to a certain extent. So we'll talk about modernizing forms and making them pop, making them more user friendly, and more than just a vertical list of fields. All right, so that's it for this video. Hold on, let me double check this section. Let me see. I want to let you go. These videos are so long. Oh, what's going on here? See how I had text? That should never happen. What's going on? Let me keep hitting these control. That's weird. Why does that have text in there? That's weird, right? Interesting. Did I not save it or something? Something weird happened. Requester details. Oh, you know what probably happened? Let me try. Uh-oh. I think I'm leading you down the wrong path. All right, let me hit Control F5. You know what's happening? And I read this, but I didn't believe it because it didn't stop me. But there is a warning on the Microsoft site that says components are not supported in form controls or gallery controls. And it's not necessary that the form is not supported, but I think all the functionality, component, all the functionality within the component is not supported within forms or galleries. And I think custom properties is one of them, because I use my rectangle, my line break line all over the place, because I thought that was, because I just hate having to adjust the colors for these rectangles each and every time I need a line break. So if you're going to use a component in a form control, you won't be able to use the custom property portion of the component. Interesting. All right. So in our next video, we'll talk about cleaning up, making these forms pop a little bit more of a modern look and feel. This is for most user experience or UX experts will say is pretty blah, and you want to make it a little bit more interesting. So in the next video, we'll talk about that, making our forms more interesting with a modern look and feel. All right. Talk to you soon, and catch you in the next video.